All right. Well, welcome everybody. So good to see you all here to talk all about tomato grafting. And we've got a great group of Johnny's technicians and folks that work with them and with the seeds there. And then we've got a great group of growers as well. We've got Andre joining us from Heron Pond Farm, Howard joining us from High Meadows Farm, and hopefully Skip Paul will be joining us from Wishing Stone Farm down in Rhode Island. So welcome everybody. All right. Okay. So Daniel, why don't you and Julie, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview? Because the reason we're running this is you guys did a very successful webinar, and unfortunately your Q&A wasn't quite working properly. So that's why I reached out and said, hey, I'd love to have you guys come onto the page and just chat about tomatoes there, because I know there's a lot of questions that come up around this.
Yeah, we Daniel and I put together this tomato grafting webinar because Johnny's has sold live grafted tomato plants for many years and decided to stop and realized that we could sort of, leverage Daniel's experience in the industry and his research background and gather some information from all these great experienced growers, sort of share that with Johnny's customers who are trying to graft their own plants.
Absolutely. So Daniel, give us a bit about your background.
So I got the good fortune to work with some of my really good friends down in Pennsylvania for about 5 or 6 winters, grafting tomatoes mostly, other vegetables too, and I learned a ton from them. Caitlin and Michael Horst down at Redefined, and through that network, I kind of got linked in with the big USDA group that's a nationwide group. They put a symposium on every couple of years. When they can, and they have an awesome website with tons of resources. That's kind of my first stop. Worked in farming for a while, and then came to Johnny's about 4 years ago now, and just recently started working in tomatoes actually. But run variety trials and stuff.
Very cool. And Andre, you're there. Andre, you've been grafting for a while, and I remember you told me about your grafting. What did you say to me on the phone the other day about it?
I think I said that pretty quick and dirty, and you throw enough spaghetti against the wall, something stick. That's our grafting. We never intended to we graft a tremendous amount of tomatoes, and we never thought that we would get this big into it. And we had to come up with something that was going to be really cut and paste for everybody, because it's just a lot. So for us, I mean, for the industry maybe not so much, but we do over 10,000 grafts a year, or we have to have 10,000 successful grafts a year, I should say. So we have to do a bunch of grafts.
Yes. Now, one thing to point out too is that what you said there, Andre, was kind of important. You have to have 10,000 successful grafts, because there's always going to be a rate that doesn't quite make it. Because again, you're chopping plants apart to do this. And actually your success rate is linked directly to your bottom line, because if you only have a 60% success rate, you're spending a lot of more money than you need to on these seeds, because their seeds aren't cheap. I mean, that's just, they're expensive. And again, they are because of what they can do for you. But there is that cost that you need to consider when you're putting this all together.
I think the seed actually doesn't end up being the highest cost, like a failed graft. It's the time of the size. But yeah, I mean, I can't believe that some people can ship a plant for $3, because I mean that's everything that it costs. But if you lose one, everyone you lose, you're losing about $3, even if you're doing it yourself, I think. And at this rate, it kind of adds up pretty quickly. Plus, there's the opportunity cost, all the time that's involved, which is hard to put a dollar figure on. But I think that between all those factors, I'm always impressed with people who crank these things out for sale. Because that means that they're making some kind of profit on it. So I'm really, really impressed with folks that can do that.
Yeah. For sure. And there are a number of folks, because one of the questions we had come in is where do I get these? And I mean, actually, I think Howard still sells transplanted ones. I mean, grafted ones. Andre, do you sell any? I believe Skip does too.
Basically, I rescue the weary. People call me and they're like, Andre, I lost everything. Do you have 200 extra plants? And I somehow always do. And then I never have to like throw it out onto the internet that I have these things. But like, yeah, I don't. Yeah, because we do so much of it and there's stuff around all the time, then the other thing is that you get this network like with Howard or with Edgewater Farm or with Wishing Stone Farm down like Skippy. It'd be like, hey, I have 200 rootstock that are not going to match. And then you take a little millimeter card and you put it behind the stem, you take a picture and you send it to a bunch of your friends. And they're like, ooh, I'll trade you for these younger ones. And that works, you know, if you know, in a pinch sometimes too. So, and that's like, you know, at $1 a piece, you know, that adds up, you know, that you're not going to, you know, like by the time a rootstock is done, it's $1, you know? So, you know, I think having like a little bit of an open trade thing, but as far as producing, if I had to do it again, I would go with like these people who advertise hyper locally and say, hey, I'll do, you know, 300 or 400 plants for this time slot.
Yeah, absolutely. And Howard, give us a little bit of background with you, because we were just talking with Andre about you actually sell plants for folks as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we did custom grafting, selling seedlings for the last maybe 5 years. I'm not sure if we're going to do it again. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty there for a moment. And we've sold thousands of them. And it's worked out great. What was the question? So that's my background.
You've done it. I mean, I've actually been to your farm. We actually shot a little bit of video of kind of like what you do there. We never ended up doing anything with that, but
right.
So yeah, you got great experience with that. Why don't we get to some of these questions? And folks, if you do have questions on Facebook, feel free to, or YouTube, we're streaming the YouTube as well. Feel free to just share those as well in the comments. I know we can keep going just chatting about tomatoes for a long time, but let's get to some of the questions people had. One of the questions that came in was, let me see, why is it not showing up here? Talk to us a little bit about disease, because I think a lot of people are seeing grafted plants, and like actually there was a really good discussion in the listserv about it. But one of the main things for grafted plants is disease resistance. So talk to us a little bit about that. I'm not sure who wants to take that question, but go for it.
Well, my tomato house that we first started using it in, we had tomatoes in there for about 8 years, 8 or maybe 10 years, just tomatoes. We started using grafts about 1 year, 2 years in. Disease has never been a problem, or at least any root-bound diseases. So there might have been some late blight, but that wasn't a grafting issue. And the yields actually, as we dialed into our fertility program, we're just getting better and better as we get used to the grafting and the varieties. So it's worked out great. I have not seen any issues. Well, we didn't have disease to begin with, so we wasn't. I can't have a. Well, now it's much better because it's always been clean soil in there. But 10 years for one crop for tomatoes is a lot, not to have any diseases. So as far as I'm concerned, it works.
Yeah. And I think that there's two main reasons that people graft tomatoes, disease and vigor. So I think people find that when they're growing tomatoes year after year without a significant rotation, eventually you're going to get some soil-borne pathogen. And the question is, do you want to start grafting before that happens or after? Verticillium is probably the most common one that growers I work with talk about. But I would say that people also sort of often don't realize what they have. Corky root rot is maybe the second most common in the Northeast from folks that I talk to. people, one of the sort of important questions, even if people aren't asking to answer, is that, none of the disease resistance from the rootstock is transferred to the scion. So you want to be selecting for whatever soil-borne pathogens are a problem, and then choosing the scion for whatever disease resistances you need for foliar.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing on the yield, and again, the yield increase can only be directly proportional to how you're feeding the plants as well. So if you're not supporting these plants, these race car, because they're a race car plant, if you're not supporting them in the field, they can't physically produce more fruit. So obviously they're being very efficient. They have the potential there, but if you're feeding a race car, 87 octane, it's just probably not going to go that fast. So I think that's
a good point.
Yeah.
You do have to up your fertility game when you're using a vigorous rootstock like Maxifort. All of a sudden, you got all this vegetative growth, and if you're not compensating for that, the plants, your sets are going to start pooping out. And you're going to go, what's the big deal with these grafts? So you really have to not just fertility but water. But we went from 2 drip lines per bed to 4 drip lines per bed. Because the UVM did a bunch of studies and they showed the difference of getting that water down deep, through the entire root spectrum, and it really made a big difference. So you got to pay attention to water plus fertility, and we did drip fertigation during the season, and that makes a huge difference to the plant.
The big study coming out, the Northeast study about the potassium usage of tomatoes is exponential when you go with indoor production, and then exponential again when you go with grafts. And so like I think all of us, because I never heard of anybody putting anything like 600 pounds of potassium per acre down in terms of like, prior to these new release studies that have just been coming out in the last couple of years that really show that. And the other thing, Howard brings up such a good point about the vigor of Maxifort is and kind of dovetails on Julie's point about picking the right rootstock for your application. There was a great discussion going on in the Vermont listserv about it. I'd love to hear more about what you guys think about it, but that can be handled with fertility management too. It's like you want the internodes between fruiting bodies on these plants to be shorter. Then the plant is going to want to take off on you, So making sure that you're not certainly not over nitrifying the situation is an important thing, but picking the right rootstock for the application too. Like certainly Maxifort, if you're going to be lowering it consistently in the greenhouse, getting a lot more than the 5 clusters out of it, pushing it for a longer, many more months in there. I mean, that's what you want. But if you're looking for the disease resistance in like our hay grove, our plants get 8 feet high and that's it. They're done. And so we want the most internodes in that 8 feet. So maybe if we go with Maxifort, maybe that's a bad idea because 8 feet happens pretty quick with Maxifort. So without the fruiting clusters happening in between. So making these choices is like about application as well. But I'm no expert. I think some other people will be able to tell what other rootstocks would be good for those things. I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, so I think this brings up the point of steering these plants, because that's a great question we had. So I'm in Southern California, grew grafted heirloom plants in my hoop house last summer, and it was a lot more work, but I didn't see the yields because again, the internodes just went so large. But a big part of that is how you manage the plants, because again, if you don't hold them back, they're going to take off. So who wants to handle that?
Well, one thing we found is trick for us to keep the vegetative line down to a dull roar, especially right out of the gate, is we keep our grafted mature grafts in a 4-inch and a 4.5-inch pot. Well, I see a flower cluster starting, and Mike Collins said that was a great way of sort of pushing it the other way. And so we do that as a matter of course, and we do shorten the internodes by starting off by keeping the flower cluster before we get the plant all the room it wants. So that's one trick we found. And then obviously just once it's up 4 or 5 feet high, we try to get back down to 19 or 20 leaves,
Yeah. So you wait till about chest high, and then you make sure that you're getting down to you're just pruning out the leaves.
Yeah, I'll probably wait till it's over my head before I go really down to 19. But I kind of watch the plant, how it's growing. And the problem we have with management is, as I touch base on this in the Johnny's talk, is that people get too many different heirlooms. Or if you got heirlooms versus the hybridized heirlooms from Johnny, all these plants have different ways of working, and irrespective of what they're grafted on. If you get too complex a situation in there, you're going to drive your staff nuts trying to address different plants. That's why I think for people just starting out, just work with 5 different tomatoes and get used to working with those. Maybe throw in a German Johnson or something that's an old heirloom graft, so you can see how the old heirlooms are going to work next to a Geronimo or something, because you can get too complicated and just end up hurting yourself.
Yes, and that means that you're probably the only one that can actually make sense of it, and as a farmer, your time is tied up where it shouldn't be. So you should try to make the simple system so you can delegate to the other people on your team.
Exactly.
The
I was going to ask Andre, do you front load the potassium since there's no real danger in that, and then you feed the nitrogen as it needs it?
Well, no, we front load the potassium for sure, and then we're given like less than 50% of the nitrogen up front in the front load.
Yeah,
and then everything else. Yeah, but you're at 19 leaves. We're at 12. Just to give perspective, we keep them at 12 leaves, and the varietal thing about just one last thing about that, putting too many varieties in one house is, some of these varieties that you want to grow because they're the best tasting fruit and stuff, especially indoors, because of the humidity situation, unless you have real control over that, you're asking for leaf disease problems that you could pass around to other things too pretty quickly. Like I never knew, like, some of the heirlooms I love got fovea so easy, until I put them inside, so that just that.
Yeah, and that's one of the real challenges, with recommending rootstocks, and it depends on what scion you're grafting onto it. It depends on your fertility regimen, and the amount of trialing that has to go into looking at every combination of every rootstock and every scion is beyond the scope of it's beyond the scope of Johnny's. It's beyond the scope of most extension research teams. It's a huge endeavor, and there's so many variables in terms of how you're managing your greenhouse, how you're managing your plants. And so, in some ways, like what Skip is saying about recommending sort of starting small and observing really closely, is probably the most important thing you can do. And before I forget, I just want to point out that a group of Southern New England extension folks are putting on a high tunnel fertility research update webinar. It's February 25th at 3:30. So it includes the UVM research, and Judson Reed from Cornell Cooperative Extension, who does a lot with grafted tomatoes. So you can find the link to that in UMass Extension's veg notes. But it's February 25th, and it's called the High Tunnel Fertility Research Update.
Okay, I'll make sure to note that. And then if you guys don't have this book right here, it's a few years old now, but it definitely is great. And I put the link in there for folks if they want it. It does talk a lot about the tomatoes and then steering them as well. So if you do want to, look at that, do feel free to grab that. All right, so we talked about steering. We talked about that a little bit. Howard, anything you wanted to add about that?
Well, I was going to ask does everybody do 2 liters per plant? Not everybody even knows that trick. Most growers I know do that, but a lot of people may not realize they could grow out 2 liters from their plant. So you're basically doubling the amount of plants from one rootstock.
Yes,
it's a very easy trick to learn, but we've done that for a long time, and I'm always amazed when I go into somebody's house and they just have a single liter and they they don't know about.
Now, Howard, when you run those, do you run them opposite directions, or do you run them both the same way down the side of a row?
Basically, they become 2 rows on one bed. So
Okay.
we're splitting them that way. So you really want to optimize as much room as you can. You know, it's a balance between production and disease control. You know, you could stuff them in there, but you know, you want to leave room. And even though we do take off the leaves, there's always a lot of leaves. You barely could keep up with the leaf production and suckering, but you want to leave enough room in the house. So our beds are 6 feet apart, and then that gives plenty of room to have 2 liters per plant on each bed. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
And
Yes.
we switched 2 years ago. We went to the clipper system of management instead of just the little plastic doodahs on the thread, and that's we finally saw the labor saving result last year. We eat the labor the first year getting it set up, but once it's up and running, it's been great and everybody likes it.
It's such a time saver. And it's also a time saver on the flip end, is when you're trying to clear a house to get the next crop in. Literally, you can drop a house in a morning, depending on the side of the house, obviously, and then load all those vines onto the tractor forks and yank them out.
Yep. Win-win.
Yes. Skip, did you want to say something?
I couldn't see the title of that book. How does it read?
Yeah, it's the Hoop House and Greenhouse Growers Handbook. Yeah, it's by our friend Andrew Medford, who used to work at Johnny's, actually. So
yeah, good book.
Yeah. Yep. Daniel, anything you wanted to talk about steering?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from the growers here is a pretty typical, typically what I hear about this. It seems like you hear much more about crop steering in like high tech, really glasshouse production, because you have so much control. And once you get into Andrew's book there, you'll start to learn about, there are tricks on learning how to control that with temperature and certain things like that that do make more of a difference too. But at some point, you only have so much control on how many things you can change in your system. So I think for the grower's point of view, you do have probably more leverage with changing your cultural and fertility management to steer plants first. You don't want to change your scion variety. Usually once you find your scion variety, you really want to keep it as much as you can. And then your last choice is, well, I've hit a wall. Can I switch a rootstock and make it more generative? That's kind of the way I look at it.
Got it. Cool.
I would say move cautiously in any direction, in any change. Last year we did a wholesale switch in rootstock, which didn't turn out so well. We tried the Shingang route because the results, the university tests look great. Wow, why would we not use that? Well, now we know why. Not everything that works in a university test plays out all over the country. And anyway, it did not work for us, and we had quite a bit yield reduction. So we are going to switch back to Estamino and Maxiport this year, and just try one other one. Small.
Okay.
I would say one other thing about leads, just in case someone's in my boat. Like, so our first grafts will be grafting probably end of next week, because we plant pretty early to get some early production for the farm stand and stuff. With that round and that round only, I don't go with 2 leads per. And the reason is that by the time that second lead puts on its first fruit cluster, you're into the second fruit cluster on the main stem. And so because this is like for early production, I do invest the extra time to make sure I have a single lead for each of those things, because I feel like I'm getting more early production. Overall, the pounds, I think Howard's right. You would see no difference if you weighed everything you got out of the house. If you did it on a double lead as opposed to what I'm doing, there would be statistically insignificant differences in the yield over time. but just because like those first weeks of flushing, I want more. That's why I do the single lead on only the first house.
Gotcha.
Oh,
That's really interesting.
one-
That's a good
one-
tip.
I know Pooh Sprague does all his greenhouse tomatoes with a single one. He just, and that's the way he
That's
finds
Pooh's
it.
insurance policy, because when he blows half his grafts, then he has a second lead to go back on. That's
Careful,
what he told me.
Apparently, he may be listening in on this. He may cut you off.
I hope he is listening in. He's thrown me under the bus so many times.
One suggestion I was going to make for new growers, and I did this 2 years ago when we were training staff, is to start some plants, and they don't have to be any fancy rootstock. Start a bunch of plants early and let them practice on anything in grafting, and let them learn the technique. And let them mess up on some cheap jet stars, and something, and just so they could get the touch and the technique and get it down. And that's what you should do for training. You don't want to, so you're not wasting expensive $1 a seed rootstock on that. So that would be a good step for people to start. Start some leftover seed you got now and practice before you get into the real deal.
Yeah, my 10-year-old has a 70% success rate with all my leftover scion to scion grafting. And
Okay.
I'm impressed with him. He wants to be moved to the big leads, but I don't think he's ready yet.
Well, there's a lot of demand out there.
Yes.
70% isn't bad. I've seen a lot worse.
Okay, so let's go into that. Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Let's talk about the healing chambers. Let's talk a little bit about, the actual grafting techniques. I feel like we've talked about after you've grafted, how you manage them. One of the questions that came in was the 16 tray Johnny's seeding chart. What's the best way to control the environment for tomato grafting in the house using this cart? So I think it's basically like it's basically like a metro rack with trays and lights above it, I think is what
It's inside a greenhouse?
I think they're talking about inside their actual house.
Okay, I would say, first of all, don't put it inside your greenhouse. But if it's inside your house, that's a different story. Dana, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you are in your greenhouse, you just want to make sure you cover it from the direct sun. Once you get sun hitting your chamber, it's going to fluctuate temperature, and temperature's a factor of humidity, and it's all just going to be hard to control. So going inside is really a great way to do it. There's other things to think about with that, but with the cart, I think just getting that humidity, you need to have it wrapped with something. You can just use greenhouse type plastic, or there are things you can buy to cover those carts, but it doesn't have to be complicated. So that's really the main thing, and then closing out the light too. That's a good starting tool.
We do sell a humidity tent for the compact cart.
Okay.
We're using the high domes over a 72 count tray, and we put those under the bench. It's really not a fancy chamber at all. I learned that from Mike Collins. His hospital is under the bench. So we do everything under the bench, but the bench is heated on top, and that keeps the temperature good. But you want things handy so you could keep an eye on them, and don't over moisturize. One of the training videos I saw from one of the universities, they had humidifiers going and all this stuff, and you can over humidify, and you're not going to get the healing in the cut. So you really got to be careful. We tried humidifiers and we backed off. And we're just going back to where we spray mist inside the dome and put that back over the plants, and just spray mist into the dome on the plastic. Never mist the plants. It's themselves, because they're way too delicate. And that's all the moisture we found that we needed. And in 3 days, you've got a pretty decent heal going on.
And when you say mist, you're using like just a spray bottle for misting.
Just a cheap spray bottle, just water. Yep. And
okay.
Just moisten the inside of mist the inside of the plastic of the dome, and put it back on the plants. The other thing is, I mentioned I use a 72 count tray, but we don't plant the outside row of the 72 count. You don't want it where you're touching the plastic, or you might be hitting it when you're taking the dome off and on, daily to check it. You really got to don't disturb these plants. And also the temperature away from the dome is going to be a little water on the inside of the tray, than being right next to the plastic. But that made a big difference. This whole thing is detail, detail, paying attention to the details of this operation, and it shouldn't be overly thought about. The easier and thing we pared down to made our success rate go up to where we do a 95% success take rate. And simple is good. And sanitation, sharp razor blades, double-edged razor to break them in half, no fancy blades, and just make that 45-degree angle cut. Put the silicone on in the tray, fill the tray. It's under the bench, and we go right through it. And
I think the coolest thing I've learned from talking, these three gentlemen are the people from whom I've learned, a lot, most of what I know about tomato grafting. But what I think is really cool about talking to all of them is that they all do it slightly differently, right? Like there isn't one right way to do it, but they all are sticking to these sort of basic principles. So you're doing some test plantings to look at the growth rate of your different rootstock and scion varieties before you graft. Your grafts are really clean. Everything is sanitized. You're putting those plants straight into some kind of healing chamber. And the principles inside that healing chamber are the same, even if, someone's using domes and someone else is using plastic sheeting to cover an area. But right, the principles are high humidity without having leaf wetness for the first, 4 days, basically. You want those plants in darkness so they're not photosynthesizing, at least for the first 3 days. So it could be under a bench, or it could be in your basement. And then the third principle is just a steady temperature so that those plants aren't stressed out because they have no root system. So the humidity, temperature, and darkness are the kind of things that you need to keep those plants alive while they're trying to reestablish their vascular system. And how you do it, I think, is just really dependent on your setup.
Yeah, for us, and I talked about this in our Johnny's little video conference a few weeks ago, is that I've found really important to make sure that the plant is not too vegetative and too strong right before you graft. So the day before I graft, I'm putting both the scion and the rootstock in a kind of a shady part of the greenhouse, because I find if you cut that rootstock and a huge bubble of water comes out of it, then it's too biologically active. So we like to calm it down really a day before, and then we graft in the afternoon of the day we're grafting. We're usually grafting around 2 o'clock. And so I think it's really important to have the plants kind of, Andre keeps us in a darker basement than in his greenhouse. I think he's achieving the same goal. You don't want those plants too fired up when they go to do that, you're grafting. And then for us, we just found having a bigger space and buying those Vicks Vapor Rub steamers that you get at Target, they're infinitely adjustable. And we have 2 of them in a little 2-foot by 4-foot little space inside our greenhouse that's well shaded. And we can micro adjust the humidity. And as we're adjusting it down, we can micro adjust the humidity downward as well for over the next 3 days. So yeah, everybody's got different situations, but I don't hear too many people talking about making sure the plants are calmed down before you actually graft them. If they've been in the full sun and you from 9 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you cut those things open, I think you're going to run into, historically we found that runs into problems.
Yes, that's a good point, Skip. Mike likes to see his plants suffer a little, like where they're almost yellow. Low fertility. We definitely stop watering a day before. We don't want them saturated. I don't let them get quite yellow like Mike does, but it's a good point, and you made a good point. You don't want them excitable growth at that point when you're doing it.
Let's talk about standards. So let's talk about so what should people be going for? Is 95% good? I hear that. I've heard 70. So what should we be shooting for? And then if we're below that, we should be like, okay, we're probably doing something a little wrong.
Well, certainly if you're below 70%, you're in questionable financial territory. I mean, that's what we found. I mean, like, we're pretty, us, we're pretty number crunch, like a stupid number crunching farm. And so below 70%, and you should be paying somebody else to do it if they would do it for you, like if they'll do it for you. This is not the hard part, the grafting part. I don't know. My internet cut off, but like, you can really do well with this part if you take the tips that, like, I came in at the back end of Skip. We have our own like beat up the plant before you do anything to it regiment, but and everybody does. But then if you graft well and have a good situation, you can get 95+% success at that. The hard part is take it out of the healing chamber and harden that plant off from the graft. Like, then is it successful? Like, how many survive that part of the grafting process? That's where I find that, like, especially those of us who are grafting late, like this time of year, it's easy. Almost anybody can do it inside a greenhouse. If you're grafting and you're pulling stuff out of a chamber in late March, mid-April, grafts, and you think you're going to walk into a greenhouse with those, I mean, that's rough. That's going to be tough to do.
No, that hasn't been a problem for us. When we take it out of the healing chamber and we just put it under a bench that's not any special except it's shaded from the top. So it's out of that protective hospital environment over to the next bench where it's just a little bit shaded. So that acclimates it, and then it goes on top of the bench, and then it grows out, fills out the 4-inch pot, and then it goes out, eventually and gets planted. So a gradual thing is right. Every step has its little quirks. So you are right.
So you're a 3-step process then.
But yeah, I guess you would call it that: hospital, healing chamber, and then the healing from the hospital, hospital recovery.
ICU, intensive care.
We're keeping a loose eye on it, and then it goes on top of the bench where it joins the party of everybody else, and then it's almost getting watering the same. We still want to be a little careful with the water wand, but within a few days it should be ready for almost anything. One thing for new grafters, I know sometimes you go in the next morning and there'll be a bunch that are, bent necks, and it's like, oh my God, they're all dying. A little patience. By the next morning, most of those should be back up, and they'll recover. So there's always a few of those that happen, and they'll recover.
Michael, I think an important thing we ought to ask all three of us is like what size they like to graft. I know Andre's down to 1.2 is his sweet spot. We're 1.75 to 2.
Yeah.
What do you, Howard? What size do you like to graft?
Well, I keep a bunch of all sizes on hand, because sometimes we can't. There's not enough of one particular size to match up, so we got to let them grow a little more, and then they'll be a little thicker. So we'll go anywhere. We have some 1.2s up to 2, but I would say the bulk is 1.5 and slightly larger. 1.5 seems to be our sweet spot.
Yeah.
To 2, 1.5 to 2.
Okay, so then the next question is, let's say you don't get it quite right. Have any of you used like putting them in a cooler area of the greenhouse or something like that to kind of slow down?
Try to slow down. Yeah, we'll try to because you never have enough of rootstock or sometimes to get it match up. You always wind up with 20% like that weren't ready. They're not matched up. You got to let them grow out a little more. So you got to slow something down. So it depends on what you're trying to slow down. Because since we use a lot of Maxiport, and those things grow fast, we're always trying to slow those guys down and let the scions
Yeah.
catch up.
I have a
And are
big
you guys doing all splice grafting, all tube grafting, or do any of you do cleft grafting?
Just do all the spice.
That's Jack Mannix.
Yeah, no, we gave that up. I did that the first year, and I realized, wait, it's taking up twice as much room. And then I went to the Mike Collins School of Tomato Grafting, and I learned the correct way of top grafting.
I got another big question for everybody. What would you rather have, a scion that's a little fatter, a little bigger than your root stock, or a root stock bigger than your scion? I always find that I have to make a bad choice. I'd rather have the scion slightly bigger than the root stock. I don't know. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but that's our go-to choice. If the scion's a little bit bigger, but if the root stock's much incrementally bigger than the scion, I think you're more likely to have a failure. Do you got anybody say anything about that, or?
Probably close to accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And those
exactly
are-
the way I think of it.
Yeah.
And if you can get smaller, if you're comfortable getting smaller cells for your rootstocks, if you give them big cells like 48 cell trays, they just, once they start growing, they're going to get big fast. But
Yeah.
you control their speed a little better in smaller cells.
Yeah, we're 98 for all our work.
I have first round is in 72s because after I graft them, I'm reluctant to want to open up more greenhouse space because it's, the first week of February, so, but then later on, yeah, we graft in 98s and then kick them up quicker to that. Did you guys talk about like contact with the grafting clip and those kinds of things?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was not understanding the Goldilocks spot. And if you go and hang out with Mike Collins, we're all talking about Mike Collins because he's like the guru. But if you go hang out with Mike, he doesn't even know what he knows. He's just moving. You just see his hands moving.
He's not a good teacher because of that.
No, he's not a very good teacher, and he tells you how stupid you are sometimes, which is not so nice either. But we all love him because he's taught us all a lot and saved us a ton of money. So, but the clips are very much a Goldilocks situation. So, if you are too loose in the clip, the hydrostatic pressure from the rootstock moving water is going to just lift that scion right out of contact with it, and you're going to have a water bead in there if you take a hand lens and look at what's going on, and you're like, oh, they're not healing because they're not touching. So that's one thing with too loose a clip, and it's tempting when you are starting out to use too loose a clip because you don't want to crush anything or something. You can also crush the outer cells by using too tight of a clip. And then you just end up basically destroying your xylem and phloem, and you're never going to heal anything because you've crushed those cells. So but it is all. I'm surprised that it is tighter than you think. Like it's snugger than I personally anticipate that it would have been. And then our rates started to really skyrocket in success when we were getting the right clip size in there. And the reason that, like as Skip pointed out, I tend for a smaller plant is I'm finding those matches easier as I get smaller. And plus, it goes along with my overall method that I'm trying to throw as much spaghetti against the wall as possible. So if I start smaller and I have a bunch of other clips on hand, then I have more time to save my own ass because I have up to like a 2. Anything beyond a 2, I've seen people do these 2.5 grafts and they look great. And I don't know how they do them because it's like wood to me. It's like, how did you get that to work? I mean, but, and the other thing is for a grafting clip, I like the ones with the tube holes in them so that I can put we use lollipop sticks that we get in bulk. And we put the lollipop stick in there and it holds it up and, holds the thing straight so they don't lean into the next cell, essentially.
Were you getting those clips with that extra thing, Andre?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
All right. Kill me later then.
You want me to tell you online, and then everybody's going to be like with the Googles. These
I
are like some, you know.
Andre, you know me. I'll go buy them all and then meet them.
Yeah, and then you'll sell them to me. Is what'll happen. It's like, oh, Mike's got them for sale.
Oh, wait a
Somehow
minute.
they're $10 more a box than they were last year. No, actually, any candy company, you can get this from their main supplier. But the cheapest source is, if you read Italian and can speak Italian, is actually, there's an Italian company. But their website is not in English. I can send you a link. And if you can speak a little Italian, you can call them, and it's like a third of the price that you can get like off of Amazon or something for them.
I think it's cheaper to break into your garage some night and just steal 10,000 of them.
You know what? Yeah, my crew thinks so. Like, they're like, oh, he's not using these.
So one of the things too is it sounds like all of you, and Daniel, I want your feedback too, because you did a lot of grafts a couple of years ago, is you're still just using simple razor blades. You're not using anything fancy to cut these.
That's not true for me. I'll let Daniel go though.
Yeah, I just think it's whatever you're comfortable with. You have to make accurate cuts. You don't want your cuts to be curved or swooped. You think it's, I mean, it's not that complicated really. You just need really good contact. But I just like a straight razor blade that's really firm. I don't like the double-sided ones because they're too flexible for me. So I end up doing a curved cut. But I think it just comes down to what's most comfortable, really.
Okay, Andre, now you've teased us on this. You got to share.
Oh, it's not a big secret or anything. I buy them off of Johnny's. I get the little Japanese things, and the reason for that is like most of these guys, I mean, they're grafting, you know, like Silas. If you go watch Silas, that's Skip's son, graft. I mean, like, he's a surgeon there, and like, he's in charge. But like, I have 5 other people grafting on the farm, and so we get the things from Johnny's. They have the 45 degrees stenciled in there. You kind of see
a miter cut grafting knife, just so we don't call it a thing.
Okay, sorry.
It's hard to find. It's hard to find it if you just call it a thing. It's not a searchable term.
Yeah, that thing.
Go on Johnny's and type in "thing" into their search bar. And or that thing Andre was talking about, I'm sure the guys will get right on that over at the search section of Johnny's. But the important part with the miter is that it's got an anvil action, and that's what people hate about it. And that is, and what you need to do is just be very liberal with blade replacement, because if you do not, you're smushing and not cutting, and that is awful. And that is what this tool is like. If you want to ruin a bunch of grafts, you could do it real quick with this tool too, because of that. So you really need to pay attention to swapping out the blades, and don't be stingy about like the cost of a blade or something, and just like swap them out. But I find, because I have a diverse number of people doing this, I have consistency, because, you know, they get these, you know, these tools to do it with.
It just makes it easier for people who aren't surgeons to do, is what you're saying.
And it's nice for like entry level. You know, there's so many aspects of this to master, right? Like from starting the seeds to the actual grafting to healing the plant. So like if you start out by having that like really, really uniform standard cut, like, you know, eventually you'll probably do it by hand, because it's a little bit easier to see what you're doing, right, with just a razor blade, and people get really good at it. But starting out, it's nice to have that consistency.
All right.
Do any of you guys use a we've moved to the dental lamps. So it's like, you know, a magnifying glass. It's like this big, and it's got a big LED light on it. So like you actually have great light right where you need it, and it's magnified. And when you're putting your gut, because we just clip all the tops off. Like we just, you know, we do them a tray at a time. So we clip 100 Maxifort off, put the tray aside, clip 100 Scion, put them in a pile, grab out of the pile and like say, oh, that one matches. And we do it like underneath that magnifying, and it's got great light, and we just go, doop, and, you know, and
That's
We have
brilliant.
to make that noise. If you don't make the noise, it doesn't stick.
I know what's on my to-buy list now. That's really good, Andre. All right, so folks, if you do have questions, I know we got a bunch of you on with us live. Just drop those in the chat. Feel free. I know we want to start wrapping this up as we're getting to the top of the hour, but I guess final thoughts from you guys on the panel too. Just what if someone's getting started for the first time in this? Kind of like, what's one thing they can't avoid? That's gonna, if they don't do it, they're gonna mess up.
If you don't plant any seeds, you can't get any grafts.
Well, that too. And I think too, starting those seeds off at good temperature. So making sure you have a good germ chamber or a good germ bench that's heating them well. So they're going to
Warm.
strong.
Yeah, warmer is better than cooler. Probably would be.
Yeah, we have a germ chamber.
I've also found if you're starting your plants, you don't want to heat the Howard. What's your bottom temperature for your for starting your seed? I think you get over 85 degrees, you get stretching and other problems.
Oh,
you don't want to come screaming out. I think good 78, 79 degrees is perfectly warm for. If you're trying to jump the temperature up, you're going to get stretching and all sorts of problems. So.
Yeah, my bottom.
We do
mid 70s. My bottom heat. That's all. And
we are at 70.
I don't put domes on my seed trays either anymore. I used to, but it could make them pop up too quick. So we just let them.
You're doing vermiculite. Are you doing vermiculite though?
We cover the seeds with vermiculite. Yeah.
What soil mix? Let's talk about that. Let's just mention that real quick because I know that could be a fun talk. Howard, I think are you still using McEnroe?
For tomatoes, I use McEnroe. Their potting soil, which is equivalent to the Vermont compost, compost potting mix, equivalent product. But I also use Lambert organic, compost-free potting soil for a lot of things.
Yeah,
we do Vermont Fort Light, and we cut it half with the Lambert potting mix because I don't want them too fruity. And some years the Vermont stuff has just got too much latent nitrogen, and I want those plants just moping along.
Okay, all right, and then Andre.
We use ProMix BX, either the organic or the not, whatever is there in the shed. We use it with the mycorrhizae just because we use it for other things. I don't think it's necessary for this, but that's information. And then we put in, so there's no fertility at all in it. And we put in half of the sustain that we would normally do for our regular mix. So we use sustain. I don't know if anybody's familiar with, like, it's a turkey product.
We use that. The recommended rate is like 6 pounds per yard. So you're saying you use 3 pounds per yard?
Yeah, like sometimes even a little less for the, 2 or 3 pounds per yard for the grafts.
Now, Sustain has multiple products. So, what number set are you using?
I'll have to text you because I don't have it on my it's not on my frontal lobe.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not high. They're not very high numbers.
No,
it's not 10. But it's
no.
Yeah.
It's the reasonable mix. I don't know what.
I
don't remember it either.
At Johnny's, what are you using? Because I know you're also trying constantly different things up there.
Yeah, we use a lot of Fort V, and we also cut it with ProMix or start things in ProMix. And I've actually moved doing all the grafting in pretty much ProMix because I've seen the high fertility kind of gives you, like Skip said, you want them a little bit behind and you'll have more control over their growth that way. But then I've even seen them come out of the healing chamber with mold or fungi growing if it's a very active potting mix, which maybe isn't that bad of a thing, but it's not something you necessarily want to see. Plus, you're just throwing out a lot of those plants before you graft. You can always fertilize them when you bring them out, bump them up into all the nice ones into something else.
Yep.
I'm going to add one thing that will help people be successful, which is ordering seeds early. Because every single seed company is experiencing pretty major delays. And while we're not necessarily experiencing seed shortages, we're experiencing, shortages on people. We can't fit enough people in the warehouse to pack all the seed. And so people are a little worried about seed availability. So I would say really plan ahead this year.
Okay, that's a really good thing. And then let's talk about variety, because I know that's definitely something that people are talking about rootstock, and we've talked about a couple, but I know you guys do sell 3 different types this year, or maybe you have more this year. I'm not sure.
Yeah, variety-wise, we still just carry the 3 rootstocks: Estimino, Maxi Fort, and DRO 141. And yeah, I think people are still just learning all these varieties come from high-tech systems, and putting them into a low-tech outdoors or in tunnels and stuff, it's not always clear how they're going to respond in your environment. It's good to try a couple. Don't be afraid to try a couple. I don't think everybody knows the answer and what's the perfect combination for your farm. But in general, they are working on improving the germination of these types of rootstocks. So I think as we get newer and newer varieties, they're going to have more uniform germination. I think that'll be really important for people grafting their own plants.
Aren't most of the rootstocks stimulated? I forgot the word for it. For
priming.
Priming. Are they all primed? All the rootstocks are primed?
All the interspecific types are, which is all the ones that we carry.
Yeah, because I find a lot of people try to use, they didn't use all their Maxifort from the last year, and boy, talk about unstable. Don't know who's going to come up. I always make sure we use new grafting base stuff for the next. If we're going to go into the next year, we never use older stuff.
Yeah, they're all primed, and Maxifort is a little more inconsistent in the first place, so you definitely want to buy that new every year.
Okay, so let's talk about seed storage. You guys freeze seeds, or?
I have some buffalo that I froze about 20 years ago. Still coming up every once in a while.
So you're just keeping seeds in a general place in the greenhouse or something like that?
Well, it's in a nice, cool.
Don't keep them in the greenhouse.
No, never in the greenhouse. Not even for 12 hours.
Yeah.
No.
Unless you're in, like, let's say a refrigerator, because I know of a couple farmers that use fridges or freezers actually in the greenhouse, and that way it's always right there. I always concern about pulling them out of the freezer, putting them on the bench for even 20, 30 minutes, and all that humidity they suck in. So that's the one concern I have with that system. But again,
we have a seed shed in one of the barns, mostly so that it's varmint proof.
Mm-hmm.
It's kept cold, and I'm sure that they freeze during the winter. If anything, I'm holding over winter, but I've gotten away from trying to keep we try to draw that seed shed down pretty low by fall to make sure we're not holding on to too much.
yeah. All right. Any final thoughts, folks, before we wrap this up?
No, we didn't talk about varieties of scions in the greenhouse.
Well,
really.
I mean, we could be here all day
really,
for that.
there are a lot of that thread on the listserv was pretty interesting. I hate Geronimo, I hate Big Dina, but yet every year we wind up using Big Dina. I mean,
because I have the yields to show why.
yeah, I know. It's a moneymaker, and that's good. But like, I wouldn't enter in any taste contest at the farmers market. I kind of walk away from those. But almost any other tomato is just a better tasting tomato, and so I'm always looking. Well, should we try something else? And my pickers don't like it, but they keep on bugging me. Oh, should we grow some other things? And it's like, well, yeah, we could fool around, but nothing has ever been comparable. Every time we'll try a few plants and they're just pathetic. We did like bee orange last several years, very productive and better tasting, but limited market for an orange tomato. So anybody have thoughts on varieties that better than Big Dina?
We like Marbone, but I don't think it's productive as Big Dino or Geronimo, so we do a limited.
But that's a prettier tomato, I feel.
It's prettier. I mean, everything, it's like everything has its virtue and its setback, right? It's like, that you pick one because it has powdery mildew resistance, another one because it tastes really good, another because it yields really high. I feel like you got to pick a few for that reason, because there's like no one perfect tomato. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to people where one person is like, Geronimo is the best tomato, and the next person calls me and they're like, I hate Geronimo. And so like there just isn't one. And so, I mean, it's great to hear all of your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, I think too, if we didn't know about Buffalo, what would we say is the best?
Who knows?
I mean, that's the thing too. So if we didn't have that option, yeah. So
I've got one thing that's indelibly stamped in my mind. I once saw a photograph of Jericho Settlers' greenhouse tomato operation one year when they had Fulvia and gray mold to beat the band, and you could see all these dead rows of tomatoes, and there was like 50 feet. She said, guess what this tomato is? And it was a Rebelski. I guess Rebelski is considered the most indestructible gray mold tomato. So if you knew ahead of time,
yeah.
Rebelski is unbelievably tough with bacterial surface diseases.
I think they're attractive too.
Yeah, they're a pretty tomato. Again, and as one, I will admit that raw tomatoes are not my favorite thing to eat. Then, it's more about looks for me now, unfortunately. And what my customers want. So it's all coming back to what the customers say they want. So one thing though, too, is I know we have a farmer we work with in Ohio that actually grafts watermelon, and they've been very happy with the results. And again, I know there's obviously this is grafting tomatoes, but there is the whole cucumber world. We actually grafted eggplant one year. And again, I don't know why folks don't, just because of we had 6 foot tall eggplant that were like pulling bushels off. It was incredible. So some of these other things too, they're out there, not as common. A lot more research needs to be done. They do a lot more of this in Asia because of the root diseases. But it's definitely something that can happen.
Yeah, I think we don't see the driving need quite as much, which is why people haven't moved into it as deeply.
Yeah, Mike's been getting rootstock seed from Japan, where it's much more common, and he's been doing eggplant, cucumbers, and a few other things with rootstock grafting on those. He has a very big early market for eggplant, and so it's a big deal to him. So there are some people doing that.
And this big grafting project that Daniel referred to at the beginning is the USDA SCRI grafting project. And they have amazing resources about pepper rootstock, eggplant rootstock, cucurbit rootstock. So they cover it all. So there's great informational resources there.
Nice. Yeah. Well, if we can get that, Julie, from you, we'll link to that after this. I'm going to drop it below in the description so people can grab that as well. A question here from Facebook. Someone's asking about, they've seen in some of the seed catalogs these things that are grafting tomatoes on potatoes. So being able to, have your potatoes on the bottom and your tomatoes on the top. Again, obviously it works if they sell it, or maybe they sell it and it doesn't really work. I just have a very hard time seeing how it's not. I would say the only reason for it is just the novelty of it.
You could sell it if you were running a garden shop.
Yes.
To your, clients that would come in and wanted a home garden.
Yeah.
That would be a neat novelty thing to do. I see no economic reason to do it on your farm.
Yeah. Howard, have you ever played with that? I know you're pretty big in the nursery.
I did. I got into the hanging upside down tomato market.
Yeah.
for a growing them in baskets. And yeah, you gardeners love it. You know, people with a deck, they'll hang it out there. But yeah, it's not an economic thing for a grower. Although somebody was growing cherry tomatoes in 5-gallon buckets somewhere out by you, Paul, right?
Skip was
that
doing
you?
that, yes.
That was me.
Now, do you still do that?
Nah.
Okay. So the one thing we love ground cherries, and obviously ground cherries are just a pain in the butt to harvest. But I mean, if you can put like some sort of them up and then have a system underneath which collects them, it makes it super easy. So I was going to play around with that this year.
Watch out for raccoons to come in and eat them. That's what happened to us. Worked out great until we figured out somebody with the raccoon was going in every night and cleaning us out. We were growing them in buckets and they were falling onto a bench with Rime on it, and so this is the way to go. I don't think there's any money in ground cherries, at least at our level. We got it that quick.
Let's see. Stan's got some great comments. He says Frederick is great with gray mold. Some people are saying they used to grow Grodina, but it's probably this Grodina as a variety. Has anyone heard of that as a variety? And then Stan's saying inspired tomato from Paramount. Is inspired a variety? Well,
Paramount is, if anybody is looking for stuff, you should definitely visit the Paramount site for sure. Like, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, definitely go and see that. They have, you know, things that you're not thinking about for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's saying it's inspired as a large fruited beefsteak, higher average bricks than other varieties. So yeah, it's from Paramount. Cool. All right, let's see. I think we're good, guys. Are we talked out on tomatoes? I don't think we ever get talked out on tomatoes, but we talked out on grafting at the moment.
It's made me hungry, all this talk about vegetables. Where's lunch?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, to me, the whole tomato grafting thing, Mike once said it to me, if you go up to Canada, you can go to a 3-day seminar and you come away with 35 things that will increase your production of tomatoes and make them healthier. But it says the average farmer that's farming outside for half their, summer, growing zucchini and everything else, you'll be lucky if you do 3 or 4 things the right way. I mean, you could do an inordinate amount of crazy things. The only thing I add that we do is post sundown venting to get the humidity out of the greenhouse. Mm-hmm. And that's been important, especially in the spring, just trying to control humidity in the greenhouse. But there's a million things you can do to make, control regenerative versus vegetative. How much time do you have?
So are you just setting that with an iGrow, or are you just turning it at like 9 o'clock, or is it coming in early in the morning? Because I hear it's like the 3 to 5 a.m. that when you want to start dumping that.
Well, I don't feel like getting up at 5 a.m. It's more easier. It works pretty good at night too. My first job was working for a big geranium grower. That was my job, to go in there at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and vent the whole place, turn the heat on for about 15 minutes and just get everything, all that block of humidity out of it. Yes, it's better to do it or both. If you want to do it at 5 o'clock, it's even better. But like I said, how much time do you have to fuss with all this stuff?
Yeah. Debbie's asking about where in Canada are these grower seminars. I forget who puts them on. I mean, they're fabulous. I went to one of them. I think that Vern had brought the guy down into Vermont at one point, and that was an incredible experience. Maybe they're doing them virtually now with everything going on. But yeah,
Vern, I'm sure Vern knows somebody that could.
Yeah, hook you up. And people are asking if this will be reposted. Yes, this will be on our page. So you can just, as soon as this is over, you literally just hit refresh and you should be able to just watch this talk right again. So, all right, folks. Well, if that's that, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on. Great to see you guys too. Howard was actually on the podcast not too long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago. So it was good to hear him. Skip, we got to get you on.
Broadcast yet?
I think that's been. I don't know, Skip. I'm sorry, I don't know, Howard. I got to go back and look. I forget who we actually have right now. And maybe if my team didn't tell you, probably not, because they're pretty much on top of that. But we do need to get you on, Skip, too. And Daniel, we could actually do one on grafting if you want to do too, just kind of like an overview. That would be fun too. So
Infinite possibilities.
always, always. That's the cool thing about what we were in. There's just always more to talk about.
I'll do one on fall broccoli. That's our biggest money maker, one of our bigger money makers now.
Okay. Yes.
There we go. With my interseeders.
Okay. Yeah. You did that your presentation on New England vegetable growers last time.
Yeah, and I just did it for Cornell 2 days ago too. So it's a great technique for us down here.
Cool.
Nice.
All right. Well, we're gonna
Thanks,
wrap.
Michael.
Thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, this was a fun. It was a good refresher on so many different levels. So thanks so much, everyone.
Nice seeing everybody.
Take
All right.
care.
Good seeing you
Yeah.
guys. Take
Yeah.
care, guys.
Bye.
Take care.